Okay, we have 5.
You said we had 35 signed up. We might want to
Yeah,
give it
so
a pause.
we're up to 7, 8, 9. Hi, guys, attendees. We can't see you, but we see your names coming, and I appreciate that you're here. I'm Gretchen Sable, Tech Support, so I'm going to wink out my camera, and I'll let the people that are running the show run the show.
So we can't see the participants?
Nope.
Oh, okay. So I can tell who they are by the list. Okay. All right. So thank you, Gretchen, for holding us all together. This morning during our UMRR board meeting, we had a lot of internet fading off. Some of our board members just disappeared and couldn't get back on. So we hope that won't happen tonight. I'm Mary Ellen Miller, and I am on leave as chair of the Upper Mississippi River Region League of Women Voters. And I'll just briefly, I'm on leave so that I can be politically active. I will return as chair after the election, but I'm program chair also. So I invited Jess Mazour to come and talk to us today about the 3 pipelines right now going through the Midwest. And right now they involve the states of Illinois, Minnesota, and Iowa, which are 3 of the 4 states involved in UMRR. So a concern because pipelines disrupt field tile, which is a source of water that flows into our stream beds and our rivers and into the Mississippi. So another reason for UMRR to be interested in this subject, other than water source off of farm fields, is that at least one of them, and Jeff can tell us more about this, or maybe 2, want to go under the Mississippi River into Illinois. So our interest as a league unit is the Mississippi River. So we really have a couple of reasons to be concerned about these pipelines. Just a little bit about Jess, because I was delighted to learn more about her and getting ready for this meeting today. Sorry, guys, I am full of dust. I just came out of the field. She currently serves as the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club Conservation Program Coordinator, but she's only had that position since 20. And prior to that, she spent 8 years really actively looking to advance environmental laws concerning water quality. Jess has also a big interest in local food. She lives in Des Moines, Iowa, and has a small urban farm where she grows over 100 different varieties of vegetable, herbs, and flowers. So a wonderful connection there. Jess, we're just so thrilled to have you here. And I must tell you all, I have seen Jess's presentation before, but clearly it's being updated almost every day. Things are happening very fast as these pipelines have to go through this process of getting approval from the Iowa Utilities Board. The board is appointed 3 members by the governor of Iowa. They are the yay and nay of whether a pipeline can proceed. And here's my favorite assistant. Okay, down.
You may see my assistant later.
yeah. And so that process is early. We're still early in that. You'll learn more about that. But they do have sort of the quasi judicial oversight. They're not technically a court, but they follow a lot of the steps where they have to collect evidence and people can present evidence, and there can be data and information presented. So we're kind of still early on. This process started with 1 pipeline and now we have 3, so there'll be maths involved. And really for much of Iowa, this is a very concerning subject because it's going through so many different states. So when that map shows up, take a look, because now 1 pipeline is seriously across southwestern edge of Minnesota. So Jess, thank you so much for joining us today. I am really happy that you could be with us and share this information and help us get a better feeling for the impact that these pipelines potentially hold for the Mississippi River.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm really thrilled to get the opportunity to share more information about these carbon pipelines that are proposed in the Midwest, because it's going to take all of us if we're going to be serious about stopping them and protecting our states from this greenwashing scheme and this big waste of taxpayer dollars that's so destructive and so dangerous. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of get into the presentation. We're going to learn a little bit about what CCS is. We're going to learn about why people are mostly upset, some of the big reasons that we hear. We're going to hear some updates about what's happening most recently, and then what you can do. So I'm going to get us started here. So the first thing you're looking at here, these are the maps of the 3 pipelines that are being proposed in Iowa and in beyond. So the first one right here is Summit's map. It's the farthest along in the process. A lot of the examples that I'll use tonight are Summit, just because they're ahead of the other 2. And the other 2 are probably about 6 months behind it, but everything is happening almost identically through the process. So when we're talking about Summit, we can usually assume that the other 2 pipelines are going to be doing the exact same steps and exact same strategy as Summit. So Summit is going to collect CO2 at all of these little endpoints and then ship it up to North Dakota. So this one impacts Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. And then this is the Navigator one over here. And Navigator is actually going the opposite direction down to Illinois. So it'll be collecting CO2 at all of these dots and taking it down and crossing the Mississippi River down in Lee County down here. And then you can see they're doing it in different phases. Right now they're in phase 1. They've not notified any of the people in phase 2 counties. That's the dotted lines. And that's a big problem just because they're being excluded from the process, but we'll talk about that later. This is the third one. This is Wolf. And this is the one we know the least about so far because they're the latest to file. Wolf is part of ADM, and they're also going down to Illinois, but you can see it'll also cross the Mississippi River, and it's just impacting 5 counties. It's Lynn County, Johnson County, Cedar County, Clinton County, and Scott County. So that'll kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about here. You can kind of see that there's no method to their madness, even if we did want these pipelines, but we don't. This doesn't seem like the most efficient way to do it. That just Summit and Navigator alone cross at least 12 times. They cross each other at least 12 times. So this is just a mess of carbon pipelines that are being proposed across the state. So let's back up and say, so why? What is this whole carbon capture and storage stuff? It's either called carbon capture and storage, CCS. You'll hear me say CCS quite a bit, or carbon capture use and storage, CCUS. And it's essentially a 3-part process. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to capture CO2 emissions from the smokestacks of, in Iowa, mostly ethanol plants. I think we're likely going to see other types of facilities like fertilizer plants, coal-fired power plants, and other industries. But right now, mostly capturing the emissions from ethanol plants, compressing that CO2 that's normally a gas into a liquid under 2200 PSI to get it down into a liquid. It's a supercritical, dangerous form of CO2. To pipe it where it needs to go. So that's what we're impacted in Iowa. We are kind of the pass-through state for a lot of these pipelines. So we're seeing a lot of this objections coming around the actual pipeline part. And then once they get to where they're going, they're going to pump it underground, supposedly, where it will be permanently stored forever. And sometimes, right now there's, I think, about 14 CCS projects across the country, and most of them are being used for enhanced oil recovery. It's when instead of storing it underground permanently, they use it to pump out oil out of hard to get oil reserves. So if it's an old oil well and they're having trouble getting that last little bit of oil out, you pump that CO2 in, it pushes the oil up to the surface. That's called enhanced oil recovery. That fits under the CCUS. So CCUS has that use in there. Anytime you use the CO2 for something, it's CCUS. So that's essentially the process. Capture it, pipe it, and store it. And they're doing this in the name of they're going to solve climate change. That we need to capture our CO2 emissions and store them somewhere, rather than doing things that we know actually mitigate climate change, like investing in wind, solar, battery storage, efficiency, and things like that, and weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels. But the real big why is, why are we seeing this all at once, 3 pipelines? It's because it's all about the money. It's about the 45Q federal tax credits. This is a giant government program, and the amount that these pipeline companies could get through this process could exceed $10 billion. And this whole 45Q federal tax credit was expanded under the Inflation Reduction Act. So these companies are determined to get their hands on our public tax dollars, no matter what the cost is to everybody else. They're going to make a lot of public money through this. And that's the real reason we're seeing these projects. This is not being pitched by any company who has ever cared about climate change in the past. We shouldn't assume that they care about climate change now. They see a honeypot and they're trying to get their money out of that honeypot. But it's raising a lot of concerns for a lot of people. So there's a few reasons that we're hearing from the most from people. And so let's dig into those a little bit. The 5 top reasons we hear is we know that this damages our land when we construct major pipelines like this. We know that eminent domain should not be used for private gain. It serves a purpose when we're building a highway or a water line, but it's not supposed to be used for private companies. In these projects, it's the public that's going to pay so that these private pipeline companies can profit. It's not a climate change solution. And these are incredibly dangerous pipelines. They're not just like an oil pipeline, which is equally as bad, but the devastation of that pipeline rupturing is significantly worse when we're talking about a carbon pipeline. So I'm going to dig into each of these quick. The first one, talk about damages land. This is obviously a huge concern for a lot of the landowners that are on the proposed pipeline route. These pictures are from the Dakota Access Pipeline. That's the first pipeline of this magnitude that Iowa has seen. And we kind of got a taste for what that construction actually looks like. You can see here that this is not just a trencher digging a trench and then laying a pipe. We're talking about a highway size easement across people's land, whether it's cropland, whether it's forested land, whether it's wetlands, anything like that. It's a strip that some farmers said at the end of this, you could land a plane on because it was almost like concrete. They have big, heavy equipment that compacts soil, that breaks tile lines, that creates drainage problems, which you can see in this picture. After they were done constructing the pipeline, you can see a lot of standing water along that easement where the land just wasn't draining anymore. And in this picture, this is from 2021. The Dakota Access Pipeline was constructed in 2016. You can still see the scar across the land of where the pipeline is because we're seeing a reduced yield in crops along those easements. We're also seeing reports from farmers that say the corn or the beans will grow, but the roots just can't penetrate the ground at a certain depth. So they just kind of die off. And so that's just a significant reason that we're seeing specifically farmers are really concerned about what's going to happen to their farmland, because this is not just damage that's going to correct itself in a few years. This is long-term permanent damage to people's land. The next big reason that we're hearing, especially from landowners, is the eminent domain issue. The eminent domain should not be used for private gain. Landowners all across the state are fighting back and saying, no, not on my land. A lot of them understand that there's a difference between public use projects like highways and water lines, and this is purely for profit. And if we set that precedent here in Iowa, then that means that our land could be taken time and time again for whatever it is that people want to do in the future. It could be pumping water out of the aquifer and shipping it out to be bottled. It just means that that doesn't have to be in our interest anymore. So this is a huge reason for the landowners that they're against it. Another big reason it impacts every one of us is that the public pays and the pipelines profit. The 45Q federal tax program, like we said, is going to be a huge source of revenue for them. It's going to be enough money to cover their entire upfront infrastructure costs. So we are literally paying for them to profit. They're also hoping that they're going to make a lot of money in low carbon fuel standard states, kind of like California, which ironically, California just recently decided that they're no longer going to sell gas combustion vehicles. I think in 2035, no new sales of those type of vehicles. And so it's kind of backwards that we're going to invest all of this, hoping for low carbon fuel standards and ethanol, when the states that they're shooting for are the ones that are leading this transition into electric vehicles. The other way that the public pays and that pipelines profit is externalized costs. There are so many externalized costs onto the public, especially onto our local governments. Right now, all of our counties and our city councils across the state are spending lots of time and resources just going through this process alone. The DNR, the DOT, the Iowa Utilities Board, lots of our agencies, and not just in Iowa, but in other states as well. And that is time that our agencies that are meant to work for us aren't working for us because they're busy taking comments from their constituents. They're busy researching what does this mean, finding out what their ability is to pass ordinances. So a lot of those externalized costs, that long-term damage to farmland, that kind of stuff is on us. It's not on the pipeline companies. The next reason was the greenwashing, that it's not actually a solution to climate change. Putting all of this public money into this carbon capture and storage CCS scheme, it delays and redirects resources away from the known solutions. And the very fact that these pipelines, there's a good chance they're going to be doing enhanced oil recovery, completely negates any sort of climate impact they're trying to make. Because if you're going to capture CO2 and then use it to pump more oil out of the ground and then burn that oil, you're not doing anything for climate change. And we have a really good inkling that all three pipelines have some sort of intention to do that. One, because on Summit, in Summit's case, the president of the company, Bruce Rastetter, said so himself. Other companies have said that they're not, since they don't actually own the CO2, they don't have a say in what happens with it. And it's kind of ironic that all three pipelines are going to areas where enhanced oil recovery has a huge potential or is already happening. Another thing is that this only captures a tiny fraction of the emissions, and we're looking at what is going to be the biggest impact on our climate. This simply isn't it. We would need to scale this type of technology up massively, which means more pipelines, more capture facilities, and more continued use of fossil fuels. So this is not actually going to be a solution for climate change. The process of capturing and compressing the CO2 into a gas, and then in the instance of having to separate out other gases like hydrogen sulfide or nitrous oxide, is incredibly energy intensive. And so just the process of keeping that pressurized into a liquid itself takes away from some of those climate claims that they're making. And we also know, based on other CCS projects across the world and in the United States, that they've been failing. And the one in Australia, the Chevron one, after 5 years, carbon capture failure could cost $230 million. In Australia, they're even considering asking for their public money back from Chevron. So I think it's just something we need to be thinking, let's use our money wisely, because climate change is impacting a lot of communities all across the world, and we have to take it seriously. The last reason that we hear most is that they're dangerous. And this one I want to dig in a little bit more about because it's a very hot topic right now, and it should be important to anyone that's in the vicinity of these pipelines. You don't just have to be a landowner impacted. So we know that these pipelines, because they're under such immense pressure, that when they rupture, it's incredibly dangerous. CO2 is heavier than air. So if this ruptures, it's not just going to float away. It's going to actually settle on the ground in low-lying areas. And if it's not super windy, it could be there for a very long time. The gas is a toxicant and an asphyxiant, and in high enough concentrations, you could die. In 2020, in Satartia, Mississippi, a carbon pipeline ruptured. This was our first experience with a carbon pipeline rupture that impacted people in a semi-populated area. The town had to evacuate. Over 40 people went to the hospital. They're still struggling with issues related to the CO2 rupture today in terms of breathing and cognitive and other impacts. It spread over a mile in Mississippi, that CO2 cloud. And keep in mind, if it's displacing oxygen, you can't breathe there, but you also can't escape because your vehicle needs oxygen to drive unless you have an electric vehicle. So if you don't realize you're being gassed because you can't smell it and you can't see it, you might not know that you're getting confused and dizzy and could pass out. And if you do happen to realize what's going on and you decide to get into your car to try to drive away, you have to hope that your car is going to start. Our EMS and our hospitals are not prepared for this. We do not have high-tech hazmat facilities in all of our volunteer fire departments across the state and across the Midwest. Our hospitals are not prepared for a mass gassing. We know that those plumes can spread 1,300 feet in under 4 minutes. So that's how quick we're talking about. So you don't have to live by it. You just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Just a few weeks ago, PHMSA, which is the Federal Pipeline Agency, they completed their study on the rupture in Satartia, Mississippi. And basically what they concluded was that we don't know if these are safe. We need to get grants, we need to do studies, and we need to pass rulemaking to even determine if they're safe. This technology is so relatively new, we don't even have any regulations for them. We don't have setback distances from people's homes, from schools, from hospitals, from roads. We don't have construction materials and safety requirements. We're not prepared, simply. And these are incredibly dangerous. I want to show you, this is just what we're talking about here for a pipeline rupture. This is a test rupture that they did in Europe. This is an 8-inch pipe. A lot of the conditions for this are very similar to what we'd see in Iowa. The pipe in Iowa could be anywhere from, I believe, 4 inches up to 24 inches. And in all the other states, I think it's the same thing, from 4 to up to 24 inches. So potentially the rupture that could happen in the Midwest could be significantly bigger than this, depending on where it is. So I'm going to have you watch this video, and then we'll get back to the presentation.
This video shows a rupture of a buried, dense phase carbon dioxide pipeline. The experiment was conducted in the safe environment of the DNVGL Spade Adam Testing and Research Centre to assess the consequences of such ruptures in terms of mass outflow, crater formation and dense gas dispersion. The viewer should note that the extent of the visible plume does not necessarily represent the extent of the dense gas hazard.
That because it just keeps spilling out. But what you notice, though, is just because you're seeing the white, that doesn't mean that's just the size of the plume. You're seeing what I believe is just a lot of temperature change. I'm going to go back to this other picture. This was in Satartia, Mississippi. When it goes from a liquid back to a gas, it gets very, very, very cold. And so this is frozen. This is a cold picture. And you can notice that this was a green area on a hill by a river. Has killed every single thing in the vicinity because it starved of oxygen and it froze it. So just these are just a totally different beast. We're not used to this. We're not prepared for this. They're incredibly dangerous. So as you can imagine, those 5 reasons bring a lot of people together who want to fight and protect Iowa, because they recognize that, you know, you might not agree with all of those reasons, but there's something in this that impacts you. And that's allowed us to create a huge coalition of unlikely allies who are joining together to stop these pipelines. We have farmers and landowners, environmentalists, indigenous people, local governments, and our coalition continues to grow every day. We're going at this from all angles, and we have a diverse group of people to do that. And that's going to be really important because these pipeline companies have immense amount of resources and money. And we have a lot of people, and we have a lot of power when we work together, when we stick together with a strategy. And that's what we're doing. We're going through the Iowa Utilities Board process right now. What was mentioned earlier here is that it's Iowa Utilities Board that has the final decision. Jerry Huser, Richard Lozier, and Josh Burns are the appointed board members. And this is a general overview of the process. So at first, the pipeline companies have to notify landowners and hold informational meetings in all of the impacted counties. And once those meetings are over, we start seeing the survey and land agent process. And that's something that the landowners really are dealing with only. They're trying to gain access to people's property so they can survey for the contour of the land, or creeks or streams, or native artifacts or burial grounds, things like that. They're trying to do it without permission of the landowners. They also have land agents out there, and those land agents are going to the landowners and trying to pressure them into signing an easement for their land. And it's intense pressure that almost rises to the level of harassment. They're not taking no for an answer. And so now landowners have hired an attorney together as part of this united strategy to fight back. Once the pipeline company gets through that process of trying to see how many easements they can get, they're going to file what's called an Exhibit H list. It is a list of landowners who have not signed easements yet. And that list will change throughout the process if they convince people to sign, but it kind of gives us our first taste of how well or how poorly they're actually doing in the process. We'll talk about that in a little bit because we're doing pretty good. The next step is that once the Exhibit H is filed, the IUB is going to put together a schedule. That schedule will be for everything, like when documents have to be filed, when parties can intervene, when the hearing dates are, and eventually there's going to be a final hearing, and then a month or so later, a final decision. Our best guess is Summit, which is the pipeline that's the farthest along. The earliest that final hearing could be would be March of 2023. I don't even think it's going to be that early. And then my guess is that Navigator and Wolf are 6 to 8 months behind them. So we have a lot of time left to organize and to get as many people on our side and to tip these scales in our favor, say, no, we don't want this in Iowa. We don't want to set this precedent. We have better uses of our money that actually keeps people safe and actually solves problems like climate change. So as we're going through this process, we're learning a lot of stuff. We're noticing trends with how these pipeline companies act. So I wanted to go through one trend that kind of also allows us to highlight some of the things that are happening more recently on the pipeline fight. And this all has to do with transparency. There's major problems with transparency in this pipeline process, and specifically coming from the pipeline companies. It's been very clear as we're fighting these pipelines that they don't want us to know where their pipelines are going. They don't want us to know who's impacted. They don't want us to know who the investors are, how many people are refusing to sign, and they're being very secretive about how dangerous these pipelines are. So the first one, they don't want us to know where it's going. This goes back to that phase 1, phase 2 thing we were talking about with Navigator at the beginning. They're only notifying people on the solid line. They're only notifying counties of people on the solid line. They're not notifying anyone that's on these dotted lines. That excludes them from the process. There are going to be hearing dates scheduled. There are going to be opportunities to attend meetings and to weigh in on the process that all of these landowners are not getting the ability to participate in. And it's not just happening in Iowa. You can see people in Nebraska haven't been notified, in South Dakota. And I do believe that we're only seeing the beginning of these routes. These are right now just them hooking up to ethanol plants. And like I said, I think they're going to end up hooking up to power plants and fertilizer plants and other industries. So there's a lot of people that could be excluded from this process right now. This was their original map. These are the people who were notified, and you can see how many people are excluded from that. The other thing that's mostly impacted the landowners on the route is it's been very difficult to get maps of the pipeline for their own land. They'll say, well, where are you wanting to put this thing? And they won't even give them a map, or they'll show them on a computer screen and won't let them take a picture of it with their phone. So they're being not transparent about where this is going, because they know that the more people that find out, the bigger our opposition is. The second one is they don't want us to know who's impacted. This has been a really big little part of the past year. Is that very first step of the process was to notify people that this is happening. In that process, they have to develop a list of people in the corridor. So people on the pipeline route and people on either side of the pipeline route. And we believe that those lists should be public. And the Office of Consumer Advocate agrees with us. And we took it to court and we won in district court. A judge said, yes, those documents should be public. But Summit and Navigator and Wolf don't want those lists to be public because they know that gives us the ability to organize and to talk to each other and to make plans and to see where other people are at and to cross-check the information that we're getting from them. And they don't want that to happen. So Summit is now appealing that district court decision to the Iowa Supreme Court. And Navigator and Wolf just recently filed their request for confidentiality as well. And Navigator is going to be taking that to court soon. So the other pipeline companies, it looks like, are going down the same path, fighting the release of those landowner lists. And the Office of Consumer Advocate stated, the Office of Consumer Advocate strongly disagrees with Summit's assertion that no public purpose would be served by public disclosure of the mailing lists. On top of that, Wolf, the most recent pipeline, they even made their list incorrectly. They purposely excluded 5,000 parcels from their notification. And their reason was, well, you're in the corridor, but you're not part of the corridor. And if you can explain that to me, let's talk afterwards. I haven't figured it out yet, but that's their excuse for why they didn't need to notify 5,000 different parcels owned by Iowa landowners. They don't want us to know who their investors are. Here are the few that we do know. We know that South Korea Company is invested in Summit. BlackRock's invested with Navigator, John Deere with Summit, Summit Agricultural Group, which is owned by Bruce Rastetter's with Summit, Texas Pacific Group, Harold Hamm and Continental Resources, but we don't know who the multitude of individual investors are or other companies or entities that have invested in this. But we do know that some of them have a pretty troubled past. A foreign company with troubled past buys into massive Midwest carbon capture project. And lately, we've been hearing about Saudi Arabia also being partial investors in some of these pipelines. So I think there's no transparency on who will be the ones benefiting from this, getting our public tax dollars and in control of quite a bit of land in Iowa. and they don't tell us how many people are refusing to sign. Summit's the only pipeline that's gotten this far in the process yet, but they filed their Exhibit H, and they filed it in a really confusing way, piece by piece by piece. So in the process, they were creating these incomplete maps that didn't have every person's land who hadn't signed yet on it. Then they used those incomplete maps to go try to tell other landowners and county supervisors, look how good we're doing, when really we weren't getting the full picture. We know that they were exaggerating their easement numbers with a lot of press and local supervisors. And we even had some theories based on looking at Iowa land records that some landowners, even though they only need one parcel, the pipeline just go through this corner of their farm, they also own this parcel and this parcel and this parcel. The easement was for all four, even though the company only needed one. So there's just a lot of fishiness going on and how they're using their numbers, how they're reporting their numbers, and how they're using that to actually mislead other people into supporting the project or signing an easement. And then lastly, we've talked about just how dangerous they are. The pipeline companies don't want us to know that. At these meetings, they tell us, oh, it's just the CO2 that's coming out of your pop can, or it's just like the CO2 out of a fire extinguisher. But we know what happened in Satartia, and we've read the PHMSA report, and we know that this is not something that can be taken lightly, that it has the power to kill us and dangerously impact massive communities across the Midwest. So the Iowa Utilities Board stepped in and said, Summit, you need to file a risk assessment, plume modeling, and an emergency response plan. And Summit doesn't want to do it. Summit is filing any sort of safety information that our EMS, our local firefighters, our supervisors could use to actually prepare themselves in the event that it's approved. So Shelby County in Iowa, they drafted an ordinance focused on safety to try to protect themselves. And now Summit is going around telling different officials, and the one instance where we actually caught them and we haven't recorded is in Montgomery County at their Planning and Zoning Commission. They said, we do not plan to follow what is in place in this ordinance in regards to Shelby County. So not only are they lying and telling us this, there's nothing to worry about, they're filing any sort of safety information, and they're saying that they're above the law and that they're not going to abide by local county ordinances. Are these the kind of companies we want in Iowa, we want in Minnesota or Illinois or Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, or beyond? I don't think so. So that's why people are fighting back. And it's not all bad news. This is actually pretty incredible to see how this united coalition is able to work together to kind of change the dynamics of what's possible when we're taking on huge, massive, wealthy corporations like this. We've been working to get county governments to say no. So far, we have 44 out of 56 impacted counties in Iowa that have objected, 78%. You can see on this map that the pipeline routes are kind of across here and down here, down the middle, and the navigators down here and here. I mean, they're not going to be able to get through. These counties are saying, no, we don't want it. But it's not just counties. We're starting on cities and towns as well. We have 15 cities and towns that have objected so far. We're starting to get to work on school districts, hospital boards, and other entities as well. And then, since the decision in Iowa really comes down to the Iowa Utilities Board issuing that permit, which automatically comes with eminent domain, it's important that we have landowners not signing easements. And that's what we're seeing incredibly across not only Iowa, but across all of the other states as well. So here you're seeing Shelby County. The red parcels have not signed an easement. So this is the pipeline route. Red is saying no. This is Dickinson County. Here's the pipeline route. Red is saying no. Kossuth County, pipeline route. Again, red is no. Montgomery County, red is no. Wright County. That's pretty powerful. And as Summit goes around and says that they have over 50% of the easements they need, I have to wonder if that's even true, because the maps they're filing with Iowa Utilities Board, these maps that we all just looked at, don't show that they have 50%. And you can go through all of the counties, all the 56 counties that are impacted, and all the maps look very similar to this. Yeah, there are some counties where they're doing better, but the overwhelming opposition is clear. And it's not just landowners. We have scientists, economists, and environmental leaders saying no too. And Neil Hamilton says, regardless of whether you favor or oppose them or are still neutral, one issue is beyond dispute. The pipelines will do nothing to improve Iowa's land or make long-term investments in soil health, conservation, or water quality. In fact, the land-related damage they cause makes them just the opposite. A large group, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but you could look at it, a large group of leaders in Iowa said, we are a group of concerned Iowans, farmland owners, academics, nonprofit leaders, and environmental advocates who have urged the Iowa Utilities Board to reject permit applications for the carbon dioxide pipelines that would run across Iowa. We recognize that climate change is driven by emissions of greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, and we support clean, safe, sustainable, and locally controlled and locally owned energy. But we can do better than the proposed pipelines. Science indicates that they are poor investments and unlikely to have a meaningful effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then the University of Iowa's Dr. Sylvia Secchi says, we should be seriously discussing ways to diversify Iowa's agriculture away from corn, not invest resources in a technology that contributes to climate change and is not going to be economically competitive in the long term. It is unconscionable to even consider the use of public money in eminent domain for such projects. And then lastly, other states are saying no too. Landowners in multiple states on the pipeline route have all hired the same lawyer to fight back. And this is the lawyer, Domina Law Group out of Omaha. They fought and won against the Keystone XL pipeline. So this guy knows what he's doing. He's worked with large groups of people fighting pipelines before. And I think we have a good chance, if we can get as many landowners to sign up, that we can do it again. Minnesota is organizing landowners, and they got CO2 classified as a hazardous material in their state. South Dakota is working with a precedent-setting number of landowners to actually intervene in the process. The counties there are objecting and passing moratoriums. In Nebraska, they're signing landowners up with Domina Law Group, and they're fighting a fourth carbon pipeline. It's called Trailblazer, and it is actually converting a different pipeline into a carbon dioxide pipeline. And we don't know the whole route of that one, but I know it goes through Nebraska. And then in Illinois and North Dakota, they have really strong landowner fightbacks. And what makes those states unique is that those are the states where they're planning to permanently sequester the CO2 underground. And they're doing a wonderful job of not only getting people on the pipeline route to object, but to also have the people that are sitting above the sequestration area to object as well. And they've also built coalitions that are incredibly powerful. So what can you do? Because like I said, this is a huge endeavor. We're taking on the fossil fuel industry, corporate ag industry. We're taking on wealthy investors from all over the world. So we need everyone's help. And so far, what we've been doing is working. So if we can keep amplifying that, I think we have a good chance of protecting Iowa and our surrounding states and neighbors. So first of all, a lot of this is going to happen at the local level. So you need to call your county supervisors, and this may look a little different in each state, but in Iowa, what we're asking county supervisors to do is step one, object. We've already got 44 out of 56 counties to do that. So there's a good chance your county has already objected. And all that is simply writing a letter to the IUB saying, we think this is a bad idea, however they want to say it. Step two is start passing an ordinance. Shelby County in Iowa has drafted a really strong ordinance that can be tweaked for each county to make it work for that county. And they have not only helped draft this ordinance, they've hired a law firm out of Des Moines and are getting other counties to hire the same law firm. So not only will we have a united landowner legal strategy, we'll have a united county fight back strategy as well. So ask your county if they are starting to work on the ordinance. If they don't know anything about it, which would be odd because most of the counties are very aware of what's going on, make sure they know it's the Shelby County ordinance. That's who they should call if they have questions. And then lastly, ask your supervisors, are they going to intervene? Intervene means this whole IUB process is kind of like a court hearing. And if they want to be able to have legal representation throughout that court hearing so that they can submit evidence, so that they can do cross-examination of some of the witnesses or submit anything and actually be able to be at the meetings, they need to intervene. 3 counties have done it so far, and I think we'll have a lot of other counties do it as well, but we need that push from local people to tell the supervisors, we want you to object, we want you to pass an ordinance, and we want you to intervene. So find out what your county has done so far and push them to do the rest. For those of you in other states, Contact some of the groups working in the area to see what the right step is for you at the local level. I know in Minnesota, CURE, C-U-R-E, is doing a lot of work with landowners and with the pipeline opposition strategy. And then in Illinois, there's the Coalition to Oppose CO2 Pipelines. And so they are working with a bunch of organizations across the state to develop their strategy as well. And then this is another one for Iowa, step 2. So don't just start working locally to get your county engaged. Also add your voice to the Iowa Utilities Board. Anyone can submit an objection. Anyone can submit 10 objections or 100 objections. You can keep doing it to keep adding more things you learn and more reasons you oppose this. But right now, we'd like you to submit an objection asking that Summit has to file safety information, and Navigator and Wolf. And all of these pipeline companies should be required to tell us what they know about how dangerous this is. What happens if the Wolf pipeline ruptures in Cedar Rapids? We need to know what happens. We need to know what happens if the pipeline ruptures right outside of the small town of Terrell. And we really deserve to know what happens when the pipeline ruptures anywhere along the state. Pipeline companies know, and they're not telling us. So please submit an objection and ask for a risk assessment, plume modeling, and an emergency response plan. Or you can simply just say, we want safety information. We deserve to know. Any of that is fine. You'll be one of many people submitting the same objection, so they'll know what you're talking about. And I'm going to put in the chat here the link to submit an objection. And hopefully they can share that in any follow-up email or anything as well, because that's going to be really important to just add your voice with the IUB. So with that, I hope that you're inspired to take action and help stop this boondoggle and this scam that's being proposed all across the Midwest. We have a lot to lose and a lot on the line if these initial projects are approved, because this is just the beginning. There's this huge honeypot of money out there. These are just the first 3 projects getting their hands in that honeypot. So if we can set precedent now and say, no, we're not going to waste public dollars like this, we're not going to allow these dangerous, destructive things in our communities, then we can really put ourselves on the right track to spending our money wisely on solutions to climate change that we know are going to make an impact. So thank you very much. And I think we're going to take questions or comments. Is that right? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay, we're a pretty small group, but Gretchen, the handicap we have is can't see people. So if they raise their hand, can I see them in the participant list that they've raised their hand?
Yes, because someone just did.
Okay, so what you want to do, and I'll try to give everyone time. So please don't ask a second question until we've gotten through the first group. And it looks like everyone's going to ask you a question. So try to keep your questions brief so that I know everyone has 20,000 questions about this. I certainly do. But again, Gretchen, even though we don't see them, am I clear that they can unmute and we can hear them?
I don't know, call on somebody, we'll see how it is.
Okay, Charla Schmidt. I happen to know Charla, and I happen to know she is a supervisor in Montgomery County, Iowa. Charla, what's your question?
Well, I just want Jess, hi, you and I had met because you were down in Montgomery County and gave a presentation, but this was very good. This was very good tonight. It's good to be, you know, when you talked about the Shelby ordinance and then we had our Montgomery County zoning meeting. So now they're afraid, they feel like at the state of Iowa will come down and will basically cut our ordinance and it won't be worth anything, even if we do an ordinance. And so the one supervisor was saying at the last week's meeting that, you know, if we do this, then we are gonna get sued as a county and it's gonna go on. And so I wondered if you had any knowledge or information about that.
Yeah, I know that they have been threatening counties all across the pipeline route that they're going to sue people if they try to push back in any way, shape, or form. That's a tactic pipeline companies have been using for a long time to try to threaten people to not do anything. And it realistically could happen. But I think that what makes this really powerful and different than previous, you know, eminent domain fights like this or pipeline fights is that sounds like a lot of the counties are all going in on that Ehlers and Cooney law firm. And so that splits the costs. It's a really talented firm that knows a lot of county stuff. And so I think that allows counties to feel a little safer through the process, knowing that they're not doing it alone and that there's a really good firm.
And Jess, just so you know, we are tomorrow at our meeting tomorrow morning. We're going to probably engage Ehlers and Ehlers and Cooney, excuse me. So anyway, that was mine. Thank you.
Thank you for all you're doing down there. I know I've been saying Montgomery County is our like second county that's on the ball of doing all this stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, I see, I thought I saw one in the chat. Let me look here. Where did that go? No,
I don't see any more hands.
I don't see, they disappeared. There were hands and they disappeared.
Okay, here's one.
Okay. Who
Carolyn?
is it?
Carolyn Malem Jenkins.
Okay, Carolyn?
Hi, we're in I should say southwest corner of Wisconsin. And I did hear rumor that something was supposed to be coming down from the Twin Cities area, which would go through the southeastern corner of Minnesota and could pass over and cut over in the corner of Wisconsin. Have you heard any of those rumors?
I haven't specifically heard Wisconsin, but I've heard Navigator has a phase 3. So that could be what we're hearing. And then I've also heard that part of Navigator's phase 3 goes into Ohio and Pennsylvania area. And then I also think the Wolf one is only 350 miles. So I think we're only seeing a portion of the Wolf pipeline. I think there's probably a lot more to it. And then Summit really seems to be hooking up with a lot of like ethanol plants. So I think we could see it expand into other states to their ethanol plants too. So I would not, I would take those rumors very seriously because, you know, at the very beginning, we only heard Summit was the first one, but we kept hearing rumors of 2 more pipelines and it ended up being true. So take the rumors seriously.
Is there any counties in southwestern Wisconsin that have contacted you or are you working with?
No, I haven't heard anything out of Wisconsin yet.
Okay, or the Sierra Club connecting with? No, okay.
Nope, I haven't heard anything yet.
Good to know that. Thank you.
But keep your alert on. A lot of the states that are impacted right now had some form of like carbon sequestration task force created ahead of all this. It's like in Iowa, Governor Reynolds created a carbon sequestration task force about a year before these were announced and stacked it with the pipeline companies. I know other states have some other form of like climate change task force. And so I think that might be a red flag. If you know that your state has done something like that, it seems to be part of one of the pieces in their process.
Okay, no, I will. We know county people south of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. We've got some in the Q&A. Let me read the first one from Janice Penn. What is happening with the plan to put lines under the Mississippi? Is this HDD and who is doing it? Is it Michaels, as in what has happened with frack outs on line 3? Not sure I understand the question. Do you understand it?
Yeah, I know. I don't know the last line 3 part, but the HDD is horizontal directional drilling.
Okay.
And I believe that they haven't been super clear about their plans yet, but I believe that's what they're going to do to get under the Missouri and the Mississippi and any other major river, because that's what Dakota Access did. And I think that's a really good question. And we're going to need a lot of people prepared because there's going to be a permit process for the Mississippi and the Missouri River and other rivers. And the EPA or the Army Corps of Engineers, sorry, is the one would be granting that permit. And they have a thing called a general permit, which we don't want this to fall under the general permit because it basically rubber stamps all the river crossings in one, rather than digging into the cumulative impact of the pipelines and breaking it out each permit individually. And so that's a battle that we're looking into right now to understand the process a bit more. But there's going to be an entire permitting process with the Army Corps of Engineers on all of the river crossings. And there'll be a lot of work to do on it because we need to make sure it's the right kind of permit that actually takes into account the cumulative impact of the pipelines, not just what it's going to do right here, but if they move it here, what's it going to do here and here and here and here and here. That's what we want, is a cumulative permit that's separate from each other, not just rubber stamping all of them at once.
Okay, Janice put in a follow-up saying Line 3 Enbridge in northern Minnesota has had multiple frack outs. And the contracting firm with Enbridge is Michaels Corp of Wisconsin. So that's what, so is a frack out a break in the line?
Yeah, if you could explain a frack out, that would help. But none of the pipeline companies in Iowa have announced any sort of contract for like the horizontal directional drilling. So I don't know that yet. I know that part, at least, of her question, that we just don't know yet who they're going to be contracting with.
Okay, Christy Gents has this comment. Great information and presentation. We'll be able to get access to some of the slides, particularly the ones about the effects of CO2. Many thanks. So my understanding is this is recorded with Jess's permission and will be available to participants and local leagues that are members of UMR to show at their local unit. So yes, you can see those slides. Case Lama, I read that the easements that Summit is obtaining here in Minnesota can be used for any pipeline purpose, any time in the future. Is that true?
I don't know specifically for Minnesota. I know in Iowa, the easements, because it has to go, because every state has a different process to approve the use of eminent domain and the permits that are needed for the pipeline. In Iowa, they're only permitted to have an easement for a carbon dioxide pipeline. So they could sell the easement to another owner, but if that owner wanted to change it to an ethanol pipeline or a water pipeline, they would have to go through the IUB process again to change the substance that's in it. But other states, from what I understand, Iowa has these strong, even though our process is awful, what I'm learning, that we have bad process here in Iowa, but we have the best process of all of the states that are being impacted so far. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was true in Minnesota. I know I have, if you can get your hands on the copy of an easement, that will really tell you, because I don't have it in front of me, but I have a copy of some of the easements for these pipelines, and it specifically says in the easement, like an easement to grant the authority of using this land for a carbon dioxide pipeline. And then in there later on, it says they can sell it, but not transfer the type of substance going through the pipe. So that will be a state-by-state answer.
Okay, Kay may have to check into that. Christy Jens has, I'm in northern Wisconsin working against Enbridge Line 5. And I'm keeping an ear to this because my concern is that this pipeline, if approved, has been estimated for only a 20-year lifespan by Enbridge 2 years ago. Why fight so hard to put this in for such a very short time? And although we haven't heard anything about CO2 for this, but I'm concerned it could be converted into CO2. And as I understand it, Jess, there is some discussion that this is just a 20-year pipeline. Is that correct?
Well, right now, when the tax credits expire, is I think when we'll see the end of this. I don't think they're doing this to save ethanol or to save the climate. So as soon as those tax credits run out, I think we'll see either them abandon these pipelines or sell off for another project. So I think that is very possible. The other thing they could do is expand the tax credits. They've already done it once. And so I think it's possible. I don't know, but when it comes to the fossil fuel industry, seeking to, remain viable in the country, and I think they're willing to do anything. Like they're willing to lie, cheat, and steal to keep doing what they're doing.
Enhanced oil recovery, is that the same as fracking?
Similar but different, because a different substance being put in and a different substance coming out. But yes, pumping something into the ground to make it easier to get something else out of the ground.
Fracking uses a combination of water and chemicals, right, and sand. So this method uses CO2. There's been a lot of speculation. You hinted at this, but a lot of speculation that the reason it's going to where it's going in the Dakotas and where it's going in Illinois is that underneath there are some oil reserves that they're interested in using this enhanced oil recovery process for. That saying we're going to bury it because one of the questions we've had in Iowa all along is why not just bury it in Iowa, right? So I do encourage you all to consider that question. Why are they not burying it in Iowa? Well, there just doesn't happen to be any oil reserves. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Right. And if you think about it too, the tax credits that they can get, you can get, they just raised it. So I'm probably going to get these numbers wrong because it changed with the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think it's like $85 a ton if they do permanent sequestration. And I think it's $60 or $65 a ton if they do enhanced oil recovery. So they're going to make a lot of money either way. But if they do enhanced oil recovery, they also get to sell the oil that's pumped out of the ground. So they have a whole other revenue source. And if this is all about money, they're not going to leave money on the table. So they can make more money doing enhanced oil recovery than they can permanent sequestration.
Sheila Mitchell asked this question. If a pipeline company wants to convert an existing petroleum pipeline to CO2, do they have to acquire a new easement?
In Iowa, they don't have to acquire a new easement, but they would have to get the Iowa Utilities Board permission to make the change. And I think if they were trying to, I mean, it'll be interesting to follow this Trailblazer pipeline. I think it's a natural gas line that's being retrofitted to be carbon dioxide. But either way, they're going to have to change what the pipe's made out of, I think. And I think they're gonna have to change a lot of different material requirements, because one thing we know about liquefied CO2 is that the minute it touches water, it creates carbonic acid, which then is incredibly corrosive and could eat right through the pipe or acidify a field or an aquifer or a river. So I think the idea of retrofitting other pipelines to hold this type of substance, liquefied, supercritical liquefied CO2, would be incredibly dangerous and dumb.
You mentioned down the road that they could expand and reach out to fertilizer plants and power plants. I'm assuming those would be coal plants, right?
Yes.
To add them to this pipeline. And Iowa has a few of both. So that could really, and a lot of the fertilizer plants are along the Mississippi because they use barges. So that could, what I thought I heard you say, Jess, was, and I wanted you to confirm this, that for any one of these three, this might not be the end, that they have the ability to keep adding on and adding on years to come. Is that correct?
Yes, at least Summit and Navigator have said they are going to be classified as a common carrier pipeline, which, as I understand it, is kind of the same rules as like a common carrier railroad, where they cannot say no to a customer. They own the infrastructure, and it's anyone can hook up to that pipeline, and the ethanol plant or the coal-fired power plant, they own the CO2, they decide what happens to it at the end. But everyone would have access to hook up to the pipeline. And the thing that's interesting about why I think we're seeing the ethanol plants first is ethanol plant emissions are relatively clean and pure CO2 compared to a power plant or a fertilizer plant, which would have a lot of other contaminants like nitrous oxide, and a lot of ones that happen to be way worse for the climate than CO2 in the great scheme of things, but they're only capturing the CO2, but screw all those other ones that we're going to just let go into the atmosphere. But once you have a more contaminated product that you're having to separate that CO2 out of, you spend a lot more energy doing that. And then you have all these contaminants at the end of the process that we have to figure out what do we do with them. So I think it's just they're going on the ethanol plants first because they can say, oh, it's a pure form of CO2. It's going to be easy. And then later on, they'll tell us, oh, we're actually going to use this to extend the life of coal-fired power plants and all this other stuff.
You quoted Neil Hamilton in his article that was published in the Des Moines Register last Sunday, I think, which examines the economics of this project to some extent. But he also mentions a kind of a trade-off that we're not actually gaining anything here, that the ethanol plants in the process of converting to CO2 to liquid consumes a lot of energy. And that it really, the end result, it contributes more to our climate issue than it reduces from it. Do you agree with Neil's point?
Absolutely. He had a great op-ed explaining that and explaining just how we could better spend our money on things that not only have a positive impact on climate, but on our soil erosion problem and on our water quality problem.
Right.
And he put together a 10-point plan or initiative that in 10 years would only cost $995 million, which is still a lot, but it's worth, you know, if it's a good investment, it's worth it compared to $10 billion that we're going to give for these projects. And it's just like,
yeah, I will be sharing that op-ed with everyone. So come back to the UMR website, and Gretchen will be putting that in the blog. And the other piece that you shared is from the group I'm a member of, the Sparks group, that put out the arguments for why we do not support this pipeline. So I will share those two through the UMR website. A couple of things have come in. Bud, no, we can't see you the way the Zoom is set up. We're not showing people's face, but you are here indeed. Janice Penn, those League of Women Voters in our Midwest states need to consider collaboration on all the issues of fossil fuel, oil and natural gas, propane and other pipelines, CO2, and who knows what is next. It is all connected to profit and efforts to prolong profit versus really dealing with transition to sustainable energy. And Janice, when you see Neil Hamilton's piece, that's the point he makes, totally, that these pipelines, and we all know that California, what, by 35, Jess, you said, is going to ban combustion engine vehicles. So there is this kind of, why spend this much money for only 20 years? Yeah. Let me see, maybe one more question coming in. I think I've covered those. So Jess, we've run out of time. We've run over an hour. This has been recorded. Our tech guru, Gretchen Sable, will be posting that on the UMR website, so you can go back and look and share it with your friends and review what is had. This is also, I just want to say this little comment. This is an ongoing development. I heard just a few months ago, and I can tell you between then and the slideshow she presented tonight, it was a lot of new information.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, because pretty important. And so again, thanks everyone for joining us. Watch the UMR website. And Gretchen, a final question for you. Will everyone in attendance automatically get a link to the recording?
No.
No.
I was just trying to think if I have the addresses to send it. And I think I do. And if I do, I will. And if I don't, they'll have to watch our newsletter.
Okay, great. That's good information. So if Gretchen has your email, you'll get a link to the recording. So again, thank you all for joining us. And if you want to watch UMR's website, there's a wonderful blog that Gretchen puts together for us. We do have a quarterly newsletter, so that if you want, you can sign up for that. You don't have to be a league member to be informed, but we do appreciate informed voters. Just a reminder, in 1920, Iowa native Carrie Chapman Capp, who helped strategize winning women's right to vote, turned right around and established the League of Women Voters, because she said, now that women have the right to vote, we want them to be educated voters. That's what all of our programming is about. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, Jess.